We're less than 2 weeks away from the start of Seahawks training camp. This time of year, everybody's talking about players and coaches and positional groups. But what about the person that really makes all the decisions in the offseason for the Seahawks and how that could bear out in training camp practices? We're going to be diving into that with a special guest here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined as always by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s tuning in, whether you're in Bonnie Lake, Washington, or if you're listening in my hometown of Auburn, Indiana. Believe it or not, we've got some Seahawk fans there in Northern Indiana. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. We've got a really fun training camp preview coming your way, one of our latest training camp previews, and we're going to take a step back a little bit away from the players and the position groups. We'll obviously be talking about them a little bit, but the focus is going to be on the man that really wears all the power in the Pacific Northwest now that Pete Carroll is in Vegas. We're going to be talking a lot about John Schneider and some of the decisions that he's made. And to help us answer some of those questions, or at least try to answer some of these questions heading towards training camp, we're excited to bring in a previous winner of the Bow Lake Elementary Stock Market Contest, as well as the host of Bump and Stacy on Seattle Sports. Stacy Rost here to talk Seahawks. How are you, Stacy? Glad to have you here to join us here on the show.
I'm good. Happy to be here with you guys. Love the show. I'm most proud of the stock market win. That was probably my peak as a student, as a person for sure. And then Bump and Stacy is fine after that.
That sounds like a much better accomplishment than what Rob and I probably can say. I got voted class clown in 4th grade. That was probably the closest I ever got to anything like that. I don't know where Rob stands on that front, but getting awards in elementary school, that wasn't necessarily something that I excelled at. Anyway, let's dive into the Seattle Seahawks heading into training camp. And again, we talk so much about the players, and there's going to be plenty of discussion on players here, but let's move away from the players, the coaches. Let's talk about the czar that is John Schneider. Now, the one that makes all the decisions, Pete Carroll now in Vegas. And look, maybe it's just the way the job works. That's why he makes the big bucks. But there's plenty of decisions this offseason that are being looked at as gambles by many people. And we got to start with the most important one, the swap at quarterback. And I think Rob and I are in a little different zip code on this discussion, and our listeners enjoy us battling on this. But it's nice to maybe have a tiebreaker here, because I understand the age with Sam Darnold, much younger than Geno Smith. I get that you're paying less money. It is a mid-market quarterback deal that's cheaper than Geno Smith's now getting in Vegas. Maybe Geno Smith just really had no interest in playing here. I understand all of that. But we've got one season of Sam Darnold playing great football, and now you're going to anoint him the starter without Justin Jefferson. I guess for me, what are your thoughts on this gamble? Because to me, this is the biggest roll of the dice that John Schneider made this offseason, and I understand his logic, but provide some common sense to this on why this decision was made, and if there's anything we can gain from training camp that maybe provides some answers on whether that's the right move or not.
So first is the context of the trade, which I know you guys have talked about at length, and I don't want to backtrack too much since your listeners are obviously well aware of it. But one thing that's, I think, lost on a national audience often is that Gino did also push for that trade. So it's not just John straight up going, I think Sam Darnold is fundamentally better than Gino. It is also Gino saying, hey, if you aren't going to pay me what I think I'm worth, then I'm out. Or like, hey, I have a much better relationship with Pete Carroll and I'm out. While I think that's true, in important context, I think we all kind of know that part of why Gino wanted to go is clearly that John Schneider didn't want to guarantee money in 2026, right? That like part of it is also how John Schneider does fundamentally see Gino. I personally think Sam Darnold feels like more of a John Schneider quarterback. Those feel like the types of quarterbacks, like the big arm kind of guys that he goes after. It's not to say that Gino doesn't certainly have a great arm, but it kind of made sense. So with that important context being said, I have to at least think that part of the gamble John is making is not necessarily Sam Darnold will be better than Geno. Corbin, I'm with you. Like, I don't think Sam Darnold's a better passer than Geno Smith. I think the gamble he's making is I can make I can make Sam Darnold not be central to this offense. I can make him not the single most important part of this offense. So the gamble is also, oh, I'm going to turn this run game around, which is kind of where it gets really interesting for me, but we can get into that in a little bit.
Well, and that's really where I kind of want to jump in here, Stacy. And thank you so much for joining us. Let me just say that right off the bat. I think that when you're talking about the gamble of switching from Geno Smith to Sam Darnold, then look, we all know the production that Sam Darnold had a year ago. But I love the way that you put it, that Sam Darnold has, he has some upside. But at the same time, he's also not likely to be kind of the central figure in Seattle's offense. It is going to be that running game. So what is it about Seattle's offensive line, whether the lack of signing somebody, a big, high-profile, big-ticket kind of a free agent, or obviously the moves that they made in the draft? What is it about Seattle's moves on the offensive line, or lack of moves, that have you excited or have you concerned about what Seattle is going to be able to do along the offensive line and along the running game to support Sam Darnold in 2025?
I still remain really concerned about the interior of that offensive line. Maybe one day they plan to move Gray Zabel to center. Certainly him at guard is really encouraging. I was very encouraged by that pick. I think a lot of Seahawks fans, I was hosting a draft party, they were like rooting for an offensive lineman. That's how desperate Seahawks fans were to get a guard here, right? It was a great move, very important move. Glad they made it. The really controversial one will obviously be passing up on Will Fries. You can understand them not going for a guy. They have very strict rules about how they like to do business, right? We don't want to guarantee too much money would be on year one, if any, and we don't want to sign a player that isn't going to pass a physical. Will Fries didn't want to take a physical with them. Minnesota was willing to take that gamble. So on the one hand, you can see philosophically as a front office why that didn't vibe with you, but you look at your failure to build up an offensive line for well over a decade and you go, oh God, like, do you kind of bend a little bit with what you're comfortable with? Because this is something you desperately, desperately need. So I don't know about you guys. I've been trying to think of times where they've taken big leaps in different facets of their game and what did they do that off season? And so the last time they just were god awful in the run, you guys already know without me going there, is probably in 2017 when Russell Wilson was the bulk of this offense. They had 4 rushing touchdowns as a team. 3 of them were Wilson, 1 J.D. McKissick. Wilson led the team in rushing yards. And they did make some offensive line moves that offseason. Not only did 2018 become the first full year with Brown, but they went and got DJ Fluker. I don't know how many people were ecstatic about DJ Fluker, but the moves they made in the offseason, whether it was drafting Rashad Penny or, getting a blocking tight end, getting your guard, it was with that philosophy in mind. Seattle's moves this offseason don't entirely feel like it's with that philosophy in mind. I love that they've gotten more athletic upside. They got like physical freaks in the draft, which is really, really fun. But I didn't see quite the same deeply intentional devotion to the run that you saw in the jump between 2017 and 18, which did lead to them being I think they were number 1 in rushing yards per game, if not a top 3.
Stacy, I'm going to piggyback off that question here. When we go into training camp, this is on my list. This is maybe number 1 on my list for the big question that I'm hoping to have answered here in training camp. What makes or breaks this offensive line? Because they're clearly investing in the coaching staff. That seems to be the biggest thing that John Schneider has invested in here. Gray Zabel, first rounder, obviously that's a big deal, but you have no other major additions. I mean, Josh Jones can play some guard, but I think they brought him in to be George Fant's replacement. They just didn't make many big moves. It was, let's develop our guys. What makes or breaks this offensive line with the group that they currently have as constructed?
I think you're right. I think it's going to have to be coaching. It's going to have to be scheme. I think we can all, and this isn't to slight Ryan Grubb, coach for my alma mater, but I think we can all look back and go, God, he really did not make the most of it. Bump and I always go back to that Arizona game on the road in Arizona, where you saw whether it was, the way that the plays were developing, whether it was the way the offensive linemen were building on those plays and the offense was building on those plays, you thought that they tapped into something special. It wasn't just Zach Charbonnet figuring it out. It was, wow, there were lanes for Zach. There were opportunities there. This was a great stay for the run. They tapped into something and then they didn't build on it. And so it was a little weird. So I think you're hoping that in addition to your offensive line coach, it's Kubiak. I am still curious to see what this looks like. He didn't have a perfectly healthy offensive line in New Orleans either, right? So it's been a minute since we've been able to see him as a coordinator with a really healthy group. But you're right. John Schneider, in an interview with the guys, Wyman, who follows me, was talking about how important that coaching is going to be. And they look at guys that they've drafted who were either developed with other teams after leaving or being cut, or who, went on a Germain Ifedi to sign contracts with other teams. And they feel like they're good at drafting them and identifying the talent. They just haven't developed. So I think you're looking at a Kubiak scheme as part of that answer. I'm curious to see what it looks like.
When we come back, we've got more to tackle. Sorry, Rob. When we come back, Rob's going to kick off the questions when we get here to the second segment. We've got Stacy Rost coming back talking more Seahawks. You're listening to Locked On Seahawks here, Monday episode. Welcome back to Locked On Seahawks Monday edition. We are breaking down all the key topics heading into training camp, and today it's all about John Schneider's gambles in the offseason. We've talked quarterbacks, we've looked at offensive line, and I know Rob is really curious with our guest here, Stacy Rost, about the thoughts on some other positions on this offensive side of the football. And it kind of goes off what we were just mentioning, that it doesn't feel like quite as many personnel moves were made to cater to that getting the run game back that we saw in 2018, including with Brian Schottenheimer coming in. And we knew he wanted to run the football. Kubiak's going to be trying to do the same thing. But Rob, I know that you were really curious about a couple other positions and how it pertains to this offense.
Yeah, very much so. And again, Stacy, thank you so much for joining us here. And again, I love the fact that you kind of just acknowledge that John Schneider might just love a quarterback that has the upside of a Sam Darnold, and Clint Kubiak, and the highly athletic offensive line that has been brought in. And I want to kind of go back to another coach, Mike Macdonald, and players that seem to fit him. And one of the other kind of gambles, so to speak, over the offseason was a decision by the Seahawks to bring in a players coming off of an injury, an aging player from the Dallas Cowboys. I don't know that the Cowboys are considered nationally as a hated rival of the Seahawks, but they are America's team, so to speak. And that means that there's a lot of teams out there, a lot of fan bases out there who don't like him or don't like the Dallas Cowboys either. What is it about Demarcus Lawrence that intrigues you? And again, what concerns you about him, specifically in Mike Macdonald's system?
Yeah, I mean, regardless of Mike Macdonald's system, I think the age and injury history of him as a player would probably concern any fan base. We spoke with some folks from Dallas after his signing who kind of said the same thing. And the one common sentiment that they had was that Lawrence was kind of underrated even in his final year there, that, because people weren't seeing those sack numbers or weren't seeing gaudy numbers on the page, they were like, to hell with him. Like, he can move on and that's fine. And the folks that we spoke with were like, no, he was still incredibly impactful if you were actually watching the film in the games, of course, that he was able to play. And I'm curious to see, what that looks like on a team that does have youth, right? Like they have those young guys. They have Derek Hall. They have Boye. They have really impactful people just within the front seven as a whole. In a perfect world, they would have a 24-year-old premier, like sack leader, sure. But they don't necessarily desperately need that player. They need someone who can help them be pretty versatile, who can mentor these guys, and who can spell still impactful plays in relief. And I do think he does all of that. I also spoke with Derek Hall this offseason as part of a separate interview, and he, unprompted, and then I dove into it with him, but unprompted brought up just how helpful Lawrence has been for his own development. And I think maybe people think that's just coach speak or just players talking, but you guys know this. When players start saying, especially unprompted, this guy's meant so much to me. I mean, goodness sakes, in a little bit, we're going to be watching Cal Raleigh in a home run derby, who talked about how impactful Justin Turner was with him, and that so much of his swing change this year has been working with Turner and Turner's hitting coach. I mean, Lawrence is working with these guys in the weight room, whether it's on moves, whether it's encouragement as a leader there. That's still monumental for a team with so many young guys.
Yeah, and Derek talked to me briefly about that after one of the OTA practices too. Like clearly that is a huge area for him and Boye Mafe. Mafe hasn't mentioned that as far as I know, but those two guys, you could see on the field how much they were picking Demarcus Lawrence's brain. How about a guy that's been on the field with a lot of good defenses and he's played at a really high level, and 33, but he still was really good beginning of last season. That's a guy you lean on. I want to stay on that defensive line though, because we talked about this so much leading up to the draft. Rob and I were just blown away. Not quite as much for me as the running backs. Like, I'm a running back guy, and this is the best running back class I'd ever seen. So, of course, I wanted to talk running backs. But defensive tackle was an incredible group in this draft. And yet, Seattle only used one of their 11. I guess if you want to say Riley Mills is going to play defensive tackle full-time, which I don't think he's going to. I think they're going to move him around some. But Riley Mills might not even play till middle of the season. They lose Cameron Young. They don't have Roy Robertson Harris anymore. I know the starters are really good, but I'm wondering about this being a gamble for John Schneider and for the coaching staff with the depth concerns they could have behind Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy II. How do you feel about the construction of that D-line? And is there a player that you're looking at thinking this is the player that has to really step up to mitigate some of those losses and the fact they haven't made a lot of additions to that interior defensive line?
First of all, that is an amazing point. And I love that Gamble's being the decisions we didn't make too, as a way to think about it, which is, I love. I mean, I think that this is such a cop-out answer, but I think it's true. You're looking for the impactful players as not just being the leaders you're already paying. They have a ton of money sunk into the defense, first of all. Let's just highlight that. There's a massive discrepancy between what they're paying offensively and what they're paying defensively. Most of their big contracts, most of their high draft picks are going to be on the defensive side of the ball, with their highest obviously being Witherspoon. He's not costing them a ton of money, but you look at other guys on the defensive line and in your secondary that certainly are. So I'm looking at those expensive leaders who are really impactful. I mean, you look at a Julian Love in the secondary, and the secondary is the second part of my answer, is just hoping that like they're really, really explosive there, and they are deep there. So you do have that kind of balancing it out. But I mean, I think you just look at a defense that wants to be incredibly versatile and has the players certainly at defensive back to be able to do that. So is the sacrifice going to be, oh, hey, we lose a run stuffer and suddenly like we just don't have literally the big bodies up front to help? Yeah, maybe that ends up being it. But I think that on the flip side, they have a ton of versatility, a ton of really exciting players in the secondary. I know that many Seahawks fans were calling for Nicky Manwari to be a first-round pick for Seattle, which might have been a little high for some folks, but I don't know how many people are thinking that.
But Stacy, I just want to jump in here. I would love to ask you a follow-up question on Nicky Manwari, and we've been kind of going down the defensive kind of path here. But at the same time, I want to go all the way back. I would just kind of be embarrassed with myself if I didn't first acknowledge your T-shirt that you're wearing. Kangaroo
thank you.
Tip of the cap there. But then kind of circle back around to the offense. Look, we can be as critical as we want about Sam Darnold, but I think we all acknowledge that he is only going to be as good as the weapons around him. And I mentioned before that the Dallas Cowboys might be perceived as a hated rival of the Seahawks by some. Certainly the Los Angeles Rams and their former Triple Crown Award winner in Cooper Kupp, of course, was a hated rival for a long time, at least for those outside of Eastern Washington University, Davis High School, Yakima, Washington. I keep asking the same question, but what excites you about Cooper Kupp? What concerns you about Cooper Kupp? And how critical do you think that his play will be to the Seahawks in general in 2025?
A Demarcus Lawrence-esque answer where the same concerns are there for Kupp. It's age and injury, especially injury with Kupp. Obviously, that's been, hamstringing, no pun intended, a lot of his later career in LA. Maybe also the danger of expectations. I mean, his Triple Crown season, his best season in LA, is one of the best I've ever seen by a receiver. It is not necessarily reflective of his yardage production for LA, but it is in terms of how central he was to that offense. I mean, we had a conversation with him about how defenses have changed over time. This guy is so smart having that mind on your offense and that passion on your offense is monumental. Having that passion with a 30-something-year-old coordinator, with a coaching staff with a bunch of 30-something-year-olds is also really impactful. I say all of that, and I'll also add on that my own expectations of Kupp, I think, are actually increasing as the offseason's gone on. When he was initially signed, I didn't see it as a straight up swap of you're taking away DK and you're adding Kupp. I don't think that's a fair representation of what Seattle did. But that being said, I think I'm expecting more than just, oh, he's like an older veteran bridge. I think there's a very real possibility not only that he's second on your team in receiving yards, but that he does get, a bit closer to 1,000 than maybe people are giving him credit for. This isn't just going to have to be this kind of Paul Richardson-esque, oh, he can get you a couple touchdowns and, maybe that third wide receiver 400-yard kind of marker. I think this can actually be a really impactful signing. And I can't tell if I'm being a homer with this. I try to be really critical and almost pessimistic, if anything else, but I don't know that Seattle's getting the benefit of the doubt here. I think people see the Rams as being such a brilliant franchise. And so them moving on from Cooper to many people feels like, well, what do they know? Well, they were going to pay Cooper so much more than Seattle is. I think it's actually a really smart move for Seattle. And I'm expecting some really solid contribution.
Stacy, we've had an absolute blast. Looking forward to talking more football with you when training camp gets here in the near future. But every one of our guests that comes on here leading into training camp, I have to finish with this question because I always am fascinated by what everybody that is linked into this team thinks about this going into training camp. But for me personally, I've already made it clear who my dark horse to watch, the one that I'm really excited about. It's an undrafted rookie linebacker, Derek Jackson. I can't wait to see this kid play because I watched him at Kentucky and I just can't believe the dude went undrafted. But I want to know who your dark horse is. Who is the player that maybe nobody's talking about that you kind of have in the periphery, like either I could see this player starting, maybe they're not being talked about as a starter, but I could see him starting, or nobody's got him on the radar making this team. And I think they're not only going to make the team, but they're going to be an impact player potentially. Who is that dark horse that you're watching?
Oh, this is so tough. Okay, I've got to take off the fun but more obvious dark horses like Horton or someone that's obviously going to make the team and just was kind of underrated. Bump kind of convinced me on this one. Unsurprisingly, a former kick return specialist has his eyes on kick and punt returners and just really wanting that part of the game to just explode for Seattle. So he's got his eye on a battle between Young and Sims, and I think that's where I'm looking. It's like you do really want that injection of speed or experience at the very least into special teams. And when you're talking about a deep group of wide receivers, that could absolutely define who makes up that last spot. So I think that's who I'm looking at for maybe a surprise cut and a surprise addition at wide receiver in the end of that group, with your kick returner being that main guy. Maybe it's Sims. I don't know, but I'll say
I
that.
think great minds think alike there. I had Steven Sims on my list of 5 players for that as well. So really excited to see what he can do. And the last mini camp practice, I swear the dude had the ball in his hands 70% of the scrimmage time, which it's a mini camp practice. I get it, but I think there's a lot to be excited about.
Yeah.
Anyway, Stacy Rost from Seattle Sports. Obviously, we're going to be paying attention to how the stock market stuff happens on your end as well. But greatly appreciate having you here on Locked On Seahawks, and we will see you at training camp at the VMAX starting on the 23rd.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
That's Stacy Ross from Seattle Sports. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. When we return, we've got our 90-man countdown, and we're going to be looking at 25 through 21. That'll be coming up next year on Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Game Time makes it possible. Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to the first pitch, and they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest price guarantee that takes the worry out of buying. Game Time is the official ticketing partner of Locked On MLB, making it easy to browse the app for exciting upcoming MLB games and events. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time by downloading the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. And one more shout out to the great Stacy Rost from Seattle Sports. What a great interview she always is. I enjoyed chatting about the Seahawks when she comes on the show with us. Let's get into the 90-man countdown, shall we? We're in the top 25, Rob, our top 25 players for this upcoming season. And we're going to start with a guy that right now would be listed as the number 2 running back. But this is going to be a team, as we talked about with Stacy, there's going to be more emphasis on the run game than we've seen in the past. That means more opportunities for all the running backs. And Zach Charbonnet, maybe he is still a sleeper to push Ken Walker III for more reps, because we saw how well he played last year when Walker was banged up in the second half. Seattle's run game was humming at its best last year towards the end of the year when Zach Charbonnet was the one that was in there. It's a different offense. Ken Walker III is the more explosive player, but more explosive hasn't always meant more yards in a Shanahan-Kubiak style offense. And Zach Charbonnet brings the vision and the power that might give him a chance to get more opportunities in this scheme.
Well, it may not mean more yards, Corbin, but last year it certainly resulted in more touchdowns for Zach Charbonnet. I mean, he only had another, 25 more carries than he did his rookie season. 2 years ago, his 22-year-old, he scored 1 touchdown in the NFL. This last year, he scored 8. So again, the trajectory of a young running back who has the size, the physicality that Mike Macdonald has always preferred, whether it be Clint Kubiak or Rick Dennison, John Benton, they have shown a preference of a variety of, or had a great deal of success with a variety of different running backs. But you think back to the types of backs that have had success with the NFL teams and the college football teams that Mike Macdonald has been associated with. They have had a big burly back that can put people on their backside, and that is Zach Charbonnet. So I think that he is appropriately placed here. I think that he is a critical part of Seattle's offense. We were remiss, frankly, in not asking Stacy Rost just a moment ago, and I want to echo your thoughts as far as how I appreciate her perspective on a variety of different players. I would have been curious to hear her thoughts on Zach Charbonnet, because I do think that he is a back that is kind of like, one of the more underrated players on Seattle's roster, that if he is asked to be the starter, I feel like he absolutely can carry the mail. I think ideally for the Seahawks, you have him be that kind of thunder to the lightning fast, lightning breakaway kind of speed that is Ken Walker III.
As far as who's going to be blocking in front of Zach Charbonnet, I don't know that there is a bigger, I think enigma is the right word. I don't know that there is a bigger enigma on the offensive line for the Seahawks going into training camp than Anthony Bradford going into his 3rd season. And look, you and I talked about this leading up to the draft as well. Like, we wondered, where does Anthony Bradford even fit in this mix anymore? Because he's 335 plus pounds. He's more known for being a mauler than he is excelling as a move blocker, even though he tested pretty darn well at the combine a couple years ago. That's not necessarily been what we've seen on tape. And he's been a starter for big chunks of the last 2 years. He's had a few injuries. He has struggled with holds. He has had issues in pass protection. His run blocking has been very inconsistent. And yet, in minicamp and OTAs, he and Christian Haynes were pretty deadlocked in terms of who was getting first-team reps. So it seems like maybe we wrote this guy off a little bit too early, because he is a better athlete than you see from that size player typically. And for whatever reason, I mean, Mike Macdonald still seems to be interested in seeing what this guy can do. The fact that John Benton was giving him that many opportunities, John Benton has had a history working with some bigger guys that have blocked well in zone blocking schemes. So I think there's at least some curiosity there now where Anthony Bradford fits in. Does he take that junior leap with the coaching of John Benton, where you start to see what they have seen in the practice field go into games and he gets back that starting job? Or is he potentially a guy that he plays well enough that Seattle is able to dangle him as a trade target to somebody? I just think there's a lot of different things that could happen with Anthony Bradford. And that makes him, again, one of the bigger enigmas for this team as far as we don't know what to expect going into 2025.
Well, and that, I want to kind of just travel down that path for a second. I mean, how kind of ironic and comical would it be that if Anthony Bradford plays well enough, that Seattle is actually looked at as a seller on the offensive line market in training camp rather than a buyer, because everybody's expecting that Seattle's offensive line is going to be terrible yet again. But Anthony Bradford has incredible talent. He's one of those players that when you're writing scouting reports, that the scouts love him, the coaches get frustrated with him, because the peaks with Anthony Bradford is better than any of the interior linemen on Seattle's offensive line. I mean, just point blank. I mean, just his size, his physicality. He is a more nimble athlete than you would expect for a guy of that size. He is entering the fourth and final year of his rookie contract, so you know the incentive is high. And as you said, I mean, John Benton, Rick Dennison and Clint Kubiak have had a great deal of success with a variety of different body types along the offensive line. I'm really excited to see Anthony Bradford this year. He, to me, is one of the more intriguing players in Seattle's entire roster, because I just think that the upside with him is so high. We often talk about like a Kenneth Walker III. If he goes somewhere else, he could wind up being a Pro Bowl kind of a player. Anthony Bradford could be that kind of a player as well along the offensive line. So I think that Seattle is right to be very much be focusing in on what this young man might be able to do in this new scheme.
Now let's talk about a player that's in my three most intriguing going into the season, because we saw what A.J. Barner could do last year as a rookie. He finished second behind Brock Bowers, a very distant second. Let's make sure that we make that known. I mean, Brock Bowers was in a different stratosphere compared to all the other rookie tight ends in the NFL. But A.J. Barner finished second among rookie tight ends with 4 touchdowns. We saw in the second half when the run game started to get better, A.J. Barner was part of that. You saw the blocking that made him a key part of Michigan's national title team the year before, where he got after the line of scrimmage as an inline guy. You can put him at H-back. He can play some in the slot and move and block guys. Some of the after the catch ability with the ball in his hands that you didn't get to see much of because the offense played and didn't throw the ball much, particularly to tight ends. A.J. Barner is still one of those guys. Like, everybody's still talking about Noah Fant, and maybe Fant still is their number one guy. But I think A.J. Barner's got a really good chance to exit training camp as the clear number one tight end on this team, because we've seen now what he's capable as a pass catcher. And I think there's a lot more there based on what we saw last year. And this offense has been catered to tight ends in the past. I think A.J. Barner's the best blocking tight end Seattle has. And I think that you could make an argument that he is much better as a pass catcher than anybody could have imagined. He's not going to have the field stretching ability that an Elijah Arroyo does or a Noah Fant is supposed to have. We haven't seen a lot of that, but I think A.J. Barner can do a lot of things as a possession receiver and create after the catch. I'm really excited to see what he does in year 2, because I think this is another player. This is a really good fit for him scheme-wise to really accentuate the stuff he does well.
No, I 100% agree with you. And again, I think it goes back to one of the questions we asked Stacy Rost before about Cooper Kupp and the expectations. I mean, A.J. Barner was drafted 121st overall. There weren't a lot of expectation. I mean, he was third or fourth fiddle behind Noah Fant and Pharaoh Brown and, Brady Russell. I mean, all these players. And, hey, what's A.J. Barner going to be able to do? And as you said, I mean, he winds up with 30 catches, 245 yards, 4 touchdowns a year ago. As a rookie, kind of came out of nowhere. Of those 30 catches, 18 of them went for third down. So he was pretty clutch as well, not only in the red zone, but just to keep the chains moving. Now that the expectation is as high as it is, however, it's going to be interesting to see if A.J. Barner is able to kind of crash that glass ceiling, or if he's going to kind of settle back down to earth. Because again, you do have Noah Fant returning. You did draft Elijah Arroyo. It's going to be interesting to see. So I wouldn't 100% agree with you. However, I think that A.J. Barner is the best all-around tight end that Seattle has in the roster, considering he's still a young player and obviously has some untapped potential to him. Again, I think he's a player that if Seattle does have the success in 2025 that we're expecting, I think A.J. Barner is likely to be a big part of it.
Our last 2 players in this cluster, talk about 2 totally different players, 2 totally different positions, but you've got the veteran place kicker in Jason Meyers. And yes, I think he's got to be this high on the list because of the fact that he has been generally one of the better kickers in the league. And last year, the number of 50-plus yard kicks that he made. And I was encouraged by the fact he was able to do that last year, because 50-plus yarders had not been a huge strength in his game. He was one of the very best long-range kickers in football last year. But we have to hover back to the idea that, guess what? It is an odd year. Now, 2 years ago, Jason Meyers bucked some of the trends in the past. He actually had a pretty good 2023 season. but can he continue that? Because otherwise, he has really been Jekyll or Hyde when it's an even versus odd years, and odd years have not been kind to him. And he missed a fair amount of kicks in minicamp and OTAs. I'm not afraid to say that. So I do think there's going to be some eyes on, do we see the original odd year Jason Meyers, or do we see what he did in 2023 where he still kicked really well and started to put that curse off to the side and make it a non-factor? And then you've got Nick Emanwari, the second rounders. We talk about Stacy, just the immense upside, the athletic traits off the charts, the most athletic safety that we've ever seen come into the NFL when you consider size, speed, quickness, explosiveness. And he was a All-American, first team All-American unanimous selection. So he's been a really good football player. On top of it, you've got the questions where he's going to fit in. You wonder when he's going to get here because the second rounders are all holding out right now because they want guaranteed fully contracts like first round picks. When does Emanwari even get in the practice field? They're supposed to report Tuesday. And you're hoping that he's going to be out there at least in the facility. But beside the point, assuming he gets that contract signed soon, Emanwari is going to be one of the really fascinating players just to see how Mike McDonald decides to use him. He's going to be out there. They're going to get him on the field, but do we see him more in the box? Do we see him a lot as that big nickel? Does he play as a two-deep safety a lot? Where are we going to see him really cut his teeth with the team? Because he does have that ability to do all those different things, and he has the athletic traits and ball skills to really move all over the place. How does this jackal of all trades, how do you figure out how to maximize him as a rookie?
Yeah, no question about that. That is one of the most fascinating things about Nick Emanwari is, again, just the positional versatility. Where do you think that he fits in? We were fortunate enough to have the South Carolina defensive back coach Torian Gray on earlier, of course, and he kind of just, gushed about Nick Emanwari's mind and his work ethic. And so I'm confident that Emanwari, even as the contract continues to be a little bit of an issue, that he is likely, studying the playbook and is going to remain as versatile as the Seahawks hope that he can be. But if by chance he is not on the field when Seattle gets into training camp, then obviously that's going to force Seahawks to kind of curtail some of their expectations of the rookie. I don't care how athletic he is. The quarterbacks are just too good in the NFL. He will struggle. So again, I think that he is going to be a fascinating player. I mentioned the quarterback, Jalen Monroe, as the guy I'm most excited about. I mentioned a couple of moments ago about A.J. Barner or Anthony Bradford as being players I'm often or very excited about on the offensive side of the ball. Defensively, Demarcus Lawrence, Nick Emanwari are the two guys that I am most fascinated to see just how they are able to kind of acclimate. So love his style, love his game, and just want to see how it actually comes together, just given all of the talent that Seattle has on defense. And I want to kind of just wrap up with going back to Jason Meyers for a moment. I think that, he's played in Seattle now for 6 seasons, and 4 of those 6 seasons, he was above 80% when it comes to field goal makes. He's above 90% in all of those seasons when it comes to the PAT, something that people have been critical about in the past. I love that he's been clutch. I love that he's demonstrated a big leg when he's needed to do it. And I just think in a defensive-oriented football team like Mike McDonald's Seahawks, then to have a kicker who is as reliable as Jason Meyers has been is absolutely critical to your success. So, it remains to be seen, of course, how he's going to do. But at the same time, I think that the Seahawks feel pretty confident that Jason Meyers can continue playing that kind of Pro Bowl caliber level and being a big part of their success in 2025.
As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, we're going to be diving into our next training camp storyline. Going to be swinging back over to the defensive side of the football and talking about Seattle's safeties a little bit. We'll dive into that. Plus, we're going to be taking a look at numbers 20 through 16 as we dive into the top 20 in our 90-man countdown. You won't want to miss it. Tune in tomorrow for the episode and enjoy the rest of your Monday. Go Hawks.